On our broadcast tonight, the Michael Jackson Memorial, a celebration of the life of a musical icon, a fallen star with a complicated life, and the world hears from his young daughter for the first time in her wrenching farewell. Also tonight in Russia, the president has a power breakfast with Putin and makes a push to win hearts and minds. And Sarah Palin, the Alaska governor, now a short-timer, gives us unprecedented access and has a lot more to say about quitting her job and what might happen next. Nightly News begins now.
This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, reporting tonight from Los Angeles.
Good evening. After watching this whole day play out here in Los Angeles, one observer wrote in the aftermath that it was exciting, sad, and confusing all at the same time. The motorcade to Forest Lawn Cemetery via closed-off L.A. freeways this morning. Then inside the Staples Center, where Michael Jackson last rehearsed. The massive memorial, at times musical, personal, even political, but also a well-performed celebration of an iconic but troubled life. It ended with the first words the world has ever heard from Michael Jackson's daughter. We begin with our report tonight from NBC's Lee Cowan, who's at the Staples Center here in L.A. Lee, good evening.
Well, good evening, Brian. It was the Reverend Al Sharpton who said today that he didn't come to say goodbye to Michael Jackson. He came to say thank you. And that drew a round of applause from both friends and family who insist that Michael Jackson has for long been underestimated. It looked like a presidential motorcade, only more somber, less ceremonial.
The 101 freeway is completely stopped.
The Jacksons' private grief became very public as a 30-car cortege left Forest Lawn Cemetery, snaking its way down closed freeways.
This is the hearse that is carrying Michael Jackson's body.
Before finally arriving at an underground entrance to the 20,000-seat Staples Center in downtown Los Angeles. Inside, a gospel choir greeted the casket as it made its way under the spotlights, the very same place where Jackson last rehearsed not even 2 weeks ago today. And with his voice gone, it fell to others. Mariah Carey's soon filled the void. Music was the centerpiece. Lionel Richie offered a spiritual ballad in keeping with Catherine Jackson's wishes that this not simply be a secular service. Jesus, but for all the celebration, this was a goodbye, and a tough one for many.
Although our hearts are aching, we need to look up, where he is undoubtedly perched in a crescent moon, and we need to smile.
Jackson's achievements wouldn't fit into a single eulogy, whether in the record industry itself or that moonwalk on stage.
I think he is simply the greatest entertainer that ever lived.
That brought mourners to their feet, only to be lulled back into somber silence from the likes of Stevie Wonder.
Michael, why didn't you stay? Hey!
The memorial hit every note, from Jackson's calling as a musician to the controversy his life so often brought.
How much pain can one take? Maybe now, Michael, they will leave you alone.
Wasn't nothing strange about your daddy. It was strange what your daddy had to deal with.
The crowd became an integral part of the service when Jermaine Jackson faltered, singing Michael Jackson's favorite song. It was the audience that lifted him back up. But it was after a rendition of We Are the World that brought young and old on stage that Jackson's daughter brought 20,000 people to tears.
Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. just wanted to say I love him so much.
Tough to watch, Brian. That's the first time Jackson's 11-year-old daughter has spoken in public. As for Michael Jackson, although the family left the memorial right away, there was no sign of that hearse, and there's still no official word on just where Michael Jackson will be buried. Brian.
Lee Cowan at the Staples Center here in Los Angeles starting us off. Lee, thanks. And of course, not all of Michael Jackson's fans could fit inside that arena. That meant mass viewings of the live televised proceedings around the globe. Upwards of 1 billion people watching it all live by one estimate. They gathered across this city and around the country as well. Our own Michelle Kaczynski is with us from the Hollywood Walk of Fame, not far from here tonight. Michelle, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. There's been a manageable crowd today here and outside the event itself. You know, police have been worried that the overflow there could swell above 700,000 people, but the actual number around 2,000. Far more chose to experience this out of the hot sun and watching on TV and the internet. All around Los Angeles and thousands of miles away.
His music.
Berlin, Moscow, Times Square, in places where you didn't need a golden wristband. The fans and the curious gathered to say goodbye. Dancing in Harlem, crying in London. Jamila Abdullah flew from London on her own without a ticket to the memorial. Finally, someone gave her one.
It was great to be amongst the other fans and to just share the grief and the loss, but also to celebrate Michael and his life.
But most honored Michael Jackson simply where they discovered him, in front of television screens. Robert Wren didn't win the online lottery for a ticket to the event, so spent the day quietly inside.
If I had to, if I was working, I wouldn't go to work. I had to watch it. I mean, it's Michael Jackson.
And for those who wanted some company without a crowd, people watched in churches, movie theaters, cafes, and the beauty parlor.
I think everyone is paying their respect, and this is the only way we can, is by closing things down and watching television and remembering.
For Dane Parker.
And he would always like, Dane, how you doing?
The dancer who appeared in 3 of Michael Jackson's blockbuster hit music videos. That's him behind the bar in Smooth Criminal and Beat It. He was offered a ticket to the memorial, but turned it down.
I wanted to sit here and do something more private.
Many who knew Michael Jackson, and many who didn't but felt like they did, decided that joining the masses and being a part of today meant just remembering the man who changed music and broke barriers. Early viewership estimates have been estimated at above 1 billion people, potentially. By comparison, Princess Diana's memorial in 1997 drew an estimated 2.5 billion viewers, Brian.
Michelle Kaczynski along the crowded Walk of Fame in Hollywood tonight. Michelle, thanks. Lester Holt will have more on this later on from the Staples Center, and NBC will have more coverage of the Michael Jackson Memorial tonight on Dateline at 10/9 Central. We go overseas now to a power breakfast that the world was watching today. President Obama in Russia had a long one-on-one today with Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, and then he sat down and talked about it with our chief White House correspondent, Chuck Todd, who's traveling with the president with us tonight from Moscow. Chuck, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Well, as you said, the president began his day with Vladimir Putin, and a senior White House aide told me that the 2-hour private meeting was dominated by a 50-minute soliloquy by Putin about the history of U.S.-Russia relations, sort of a throwback to the Soviet-era leaders.
Prime Minister.
In his first ever face-to-face meeting with Mr. Putin at his home just outside Moscow this morning, the president had a chance to size up Russia's most powerful politician.
He is strong. He cares deeply about Russia, and he has suspicions about the United States.
Mr. Obama, who last week said Putin had one foot in the old ways of doing business, stuck to that assessment today.
He's somebody who knows the pains and hardships and difficulties of the Russian past, and you know, that still informs some of his views. I found him to be very smart, and I found him to have a practical bent.
And it's that practical bent that Mr. Obama hopes to appeal to on issues like Iran.
I am persuaded that they do not want to see Iran possess a nuclear weapon. Can we provide a door for Iran to walk through where they say that we are not going to develop a nuclear weapon?
Bottom line, the president acknowledged the Russians still need more convincing when it comes to Iran.
We definitely have some diplomatic work to do because understanding that the situation's serious doesn't automatically translate into the kind of action that leads to the results that we'd like to see.
Just ahead of the summit of industrial nations in Italy, Mr. Obama addressed criticism leveled by his own vice president that his team misread the severity of the recession.
Rather than say misread, we had incomplete information. In some areas, you're seeing the economic engine turn. But what we always knew was that A, this recession was going to be deep, B, it was going to last for a while.
Mr. Obama spent his last full day in Moscow appealing to the Russian people about shared interests.
This can't just be a matter of two presidents. It has to go deeper. It has to be between our people.
Now, Brian, I did ask the president about the hot political story of the last week, Sarah Palin deciding to resign her governorship. He said he takes it at her word that she was simply making this decision to respect her family. Tomorrow, he heads to Italy, where there's that meeting of the G8, but yet some 36 world leaders will actually be attending as well. Brian?
Chuck Todd traveling with the president in Moscow tonight. Chuck, thanks. And when we continue along the way from Los Angeles tonight, we'll go north to Alaska. More on Governor Sarah Palin. Back in public now and telling NBC's Andrea Mitchell what she's thinking about the future. Later, more on the Michael Jackson Memorial, what today's events will say about his legacy. It was a July 4th holiday weekend bombshell. Alaska Governor Sarah Palin announcing she's quitting her day job. Andrea Mitchell went to Alaska to find out more and wound up hearing it from the governor herself. Andrea is with us tonight from Anchorage, Alaska. Andrea, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. We flew to a remote Alaskan fishing village to catch up with Sarah Palin and find out why she shocked the political world with her abrupt resignation.
Are you staying warm?
I am. Sarah Palin reemerged on the shores of Bristol Bay, Alaska.
You gonna ride with us?
I'd love to.
Okay.
It's an annual retreat at the peak of the salmon run in the village where her husband's family has been commercial fishing for generations. But on this day, a giant photo opportunity to try to rebut internet speculation about why she quit.
How does it make you feel being back out in the bay?
It's awesome. It's beautiful.
Is that a typical size?
Yeah. Yeah. You'll see out here kings that are huge and then regular reds that are here.
She says resigning was not a snap decision.
I knew that I wasn't going to run for re-election. I knew that everything changed on August 29th in politics in Alaska. That's the day that I was tapped to run for Vice President of the United States.
You haven't finished the job, some would say.
You're not listening to me as to why I wouldn't be able to finish that final year in office without it costing the state millions of dollars and countless hours of wasted time, We have true, worthy public causes.
Some people have said that you saw the bright lights from the national campaign and came back, and it was very hard to readjust to the nitty-gritty work of
the nitty-gritty, like you mean the fish slime and the dirt under the fingernails and stuff that
Juneau,
is me?
The state capitol, the hard legislative slog.
No, that's not. I am a fighter. I thrive on challenge.
No doubts at all?
No doubts at all.
The right decision for the kids and for you?
Oh, for the state, yeah, so, and the family.
But she isn't ruling out politics. Can you imagine yourself running for president?
I don't know what the future holds. Can't predict what the next fish run's going to look like, much less what's going to happen in a couple of years.
What is clear is that Sarah Palin may be walking off into the sunset, but she is hardly about to fade away. And today, Palin was back at work, signing a bill, wrapping up state business, and comfortable with her decision, even if it means that she will never hold higher office. Brian?
Andrea Mitchell in Anchorage, Alaska, after an interesting day with the governor. Andrea, thanks. An important news item tonight about health, especially for those who fly a lot. Specifically, this is about DVT, deep vein thrombosis. It's the condition that received so much attention when it took the life of our colleague David Bloom at the start of the Iraq War. A new study says the risk of life-threatening blood clots is 3 times greater for people who find themselves cramped into an airplane for hours at a time. This report says it's important for people to know the symptoms, to try to move around and stay hydrated. An estimated 2 million people a year suffer from deep vein thrombosis. Back in New York, on Wall Street today, stocks fell hard in very light trading. Dow finished the day down more than 161 points, ending at the lowest mark since late April. And up next, what is different about this trip to Russia, where the Obama family is concerned? Something a lot of people have noticed about this visit when we continue. It's been another violent day in western China. Perhaps you saw our reporting on it last night. And now for another day, police were using tear gas to disperse ethnic riots. Meanwhile, hundreds of Muslim women filled into the streets to protest their husbands' arrest. More than 150 people are dead, and there is now a curfew across that region. We have more now on the Obama's trip to Russia, as promised. This is the president's 4th major foreign trip. All the previous trips have drawn huge crowds, massive media coverage. Until now, it's different this time in Russia. White House correspondent Savannah Guthrie has more from Moscow.
This is the kind of reception the president is used to getting on the streets of Europe. But in Moscow's Red Square, yet so much. Outside the Kremlin Monday, the pending arrival of a celebrity American president barely drew a crowd.
Did you know President Obama is giving a speech here today? No. Do you think most Russians are interested in this visit, or are they not?
I don't think so.
While the president has spent 2 days having a series of high-profile encounters with Russia's leaders, ordinary Russians hardly seem to notice.
Here in Moscow, most people aren't talking about President Obama. In fact, the night before he arrived, national television barely
compliment, painting Mr. Obama's face on traditional Russian dolls. Savannah Guthrie, NBC News, Moscow.
And we're back in a moment from Los Angeles with a look at just what kind of legacy will be left behind after the event so many witnessed here in LA today. One of the moments from the Michael Jackson Memorial today, Mariah Carey and Trey Lorenz singing one of the Jackson 5's early hits, I'll Be There. Lester Holt was my partner for the coverage earlier today. He is at the Staples Center tonight. And Lester, as we look back on it, what exactly do you think we witnessed there today?
Brian, I think we witnessed the period to a very long sentence that's been growing for almost 2 weeks, a sentence about his musical legacy, about his fame, about what he meant to people. We've all been talking about it for those 2 weeks. I think the public was clamoring to hear in one place those words come from his peers and his family. They got that. The end of that sentence. Another sentence continues, obviously, about prescription drugs and legal battles. But I think this was important for people. The other thing we heard today was a sense of humanizing Michael Jackson beyond the star. We heard Brooke Shields come out and talk about how they related to each other as 2 child stars growing up and who laughed together. And she offered a very human reflection on him. And then, of course, Paris, Michael's daughter, and those heartfelt words at the end about he was the greatest father anyone could ever have. That's a great equalizer. Whatever you thought of Michael Jackson, no parent, no person can watch that and not understand the grief of a child who's lost a parent. And lastly, Brian, I think we saw some attempt to perhaps repair the image, even in death, of Michael Jackson. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee talking about innocent until proven guilty. And there were other comments suggesting that Michael, in some ways, might have been a victim. Brian?
Lester Holt from the Staples Center. He'll be hosting Dateline, by the way, tonight on this NBC station. Lester, thanks. And that'll do it for our broadcast this Tuesday night. Thank you for being with us. I'm Brian Williams, reporting tonight from our NBC News Los Angeles Bureau. We'll see you back in New York tomorrow night. We'll go off the air here tonight with more from today's memorial. Jermaine Jackson singing his late brother's favorite song, Good Night, from Los Angeles.
You'll find that life still with